step into that lovely, peaceful time of our Sunday morning where we do surrender. Surrender whatever cares or concerns we have, whatever doubts or fears, whatever load we've been carrying. We let it all go. We give it up to Spirit. Take a long, deep breath. And as you exhale, sink deeply and comfortably into your chair. With another long, deep breath, fill your whole being with light and love as well as oxygen. And with the next exhalation, surrender whatever doesn't serve your highest good. Finally, one more long, deep, cleansing breath to fill you up, to swirl around within you and to wash away as you exhale. Whatever is not for your highest good. This is our moment, our precious moment, our sacred moment, where we surrender to that higher consciousness within us, that Christ consciousness, that higher wisdom that connects us with all that Mother, Father, God is. As we relax and let go, anything that separates us, we become aware of our oneness, our innate connection with that intelligence, the creative all that is, who continues to sustain it and keep it in balance. In this moment, in this place, safe and sacred, we surrender all in the silence. As we surrender, we open ourselves to divine wisdom, to divine guidance, to new ideas and inspiration. As we let go of what doesn't serve us, we are open and receptive to higher consciousness, to higher ways of living and being that emerge organically, easily, naturally from our time in the silence. So we say thank you to that universal intelligence that is constantly flowing into us and that we are receptive to as we surrender. We are grateful, God, for this sacred moment, grateful for the release and the reprieve, grateful for the uplifting inspiration that now carries us forward. And so,
to continue in this meditative zone. I love the great Tin Pan Alley songwriters and the songs because it seems to me a lot of them were unity practitioners, even though they didn't call themselves that. And this is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. It's an Irving Berlin song from 1994. And normally it's...
1925.
Yes. He was well gone by 1995. But people were singing it in 1995. And this is a song that was originally a wedding song. But I like to think of it as a song that God's singing to me every night. So if you want to close your eyes and feel like you're a little one in the lap of God on Father's Day. I'll be loving you always with a love that's true. Always, when the things you planned need a helping hand, I will understand. Always, always. Days may not be fair. Always, that's when I'll be there. Always, not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always. We need an echo here, so help us. I'll be loving you when? Always. With the love that's true when? Always. I love it. When the things you plan need a helping hand, I will understand. Always. Always. Ain't that lovely? Days may not be fair. Always, that's when I'll be there. Always, not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always, not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always.
Thank you so much, Mark and Amy. Good to have you back. Happy Father's Day. Let's have all of our dads stand up so we can acknowledge them. Come on, dads, don't be shy. All right. Oh, these fathers. Thank you for the loving work you do, not only with your own children, but with all of those that you claim as children. It's appropriate on Father's Day for us to talk about a father. We're going to talk about Filippo Brunelleschi. You remember him, right? Dad? Well, okay. He was the father of Renaissance architecture. And having just returned from 3 fabulous weeks in Italy and a little touch base in Lucerne, Switzerland, art and architecture and people like Brunelleschi are very much on the fore of my mind. And it really struck me as we toured some of the beautiful churches and cathedrals in Italy. What were these buildings about? And what can they tell me about my spiritual journey that I get to share with you? Well, Brunelleschi was an amazing man, a real Renaissance man. He is the mathematician who came up with the whole idea of linear perspective. You know, how things that are closer to you are bigger and things that are far away from you are smaller, and introduced that to the world of art, a concept that Leonardo da Vinci thought was really cool and began to build on it. He was a mathematician, he was an architect. He actually, some of the things that he brought forward inspired the development of what we know of as modern science. As a designer, his greatest feat is that dome. You might recognize that. That's the Duomo. That's the cathedral in Florence, Italy. And that dome has got a very interesting history because that is the second dome that was built on that building. The first one, because of the size and the height and the dimension, caved in. Imagine sitting in church on Sunday morning and having the roof fall in right in front of the altar. They proceeded with that building for 18 years with a hole in the roof because no one could figure out how to build a dome that would last until Brunelleschi came along. So if you ever have the opportunity to visit that beautiful cathedral, and we're going to look at it a little bit more in a minute, we know and remember that it's his architectural capability, his mathematical ability, and his engineering acumen that resolved the challenge of the dome at the Duomo. And it also paved the way for a similar dome on St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. The man had broad influence. While as stunning as some of his achievements are, the design of Brunelleschi's that touched me the most is this one, Santo Spirito. It speaks a powerful spiritual message to us that as we move through our lesson this morning, we're going to explore along the way. Santo Spirito was actually an idea in the mind of Brunelleschi, we're told, as early as 1428, but construction didn't actually start till about 1441. It took about 40 years to build this structure on the foundation of an old church and adjoining a monastery. In fact, it was originally an Augustinian church and convent, and he incorporated elements of those buildings into this one. Most, if not all, of the old churches and cathedrals all over Europe are built on the foundation of previous churches. Maybe there's a little spiritual lesson in there for us. Are we building on the foundation of spiritual ideas of those who've gone before us? Well, the first pillars for this church on the interior were delivered in 1446, just 10 days before Brunelleschi made his transition. They constructed a bell tower in 1503, and a marble Baroque baldachin was added in 1601. But the exterior of the church remained completely undecorated until the 18th century, when the plain, simple stone blocks were finally plastered over, like what you see here. The traditional decorative facade was never built. I want you to take in that simple, elegant design because it's a stark contrast to some of the other European basilicas we visited. For example, the Duomo in Florence. We just took a glimpse at it. That was built between 1296 and 1436. A couple hundred years to build this structure, 140 to be exact. The dome itself, that was Brunelleschi's contribution to the building, took 16 years to construct. The exterior of this building is gorgeous. Green and pink and white marble. It's a facade they began in the 14th century and actually wasn't completed till 1887. But look at the detail. It's gorgeous and engaging. The exterior is beautiful, and sort of a contrast to the interior, which for a European cathedral is actually rather stark, rather simple. We were traveling with friends, and Lee and I have been there before. They were asking about touring the inside of the Duomo, and we said, don't bother. It's nice, but there's so many other things that are so much more exciting to visit. The Duomo in Florence, the exterior is all show and glitz. The interior is actually rather simple. And then there's the Duomo in Milan. I know you'll recognize that picture. That identifies Milan everywhere around the world. It's so well known. It's a Gothic structure with flying buttresses and, as you can see, detailed, ornate carving. It only took 600 years to build this cathedral. It began in 1386, and it is the 5th largest Christian church in the world. It's only outpaced by St. Peter's at the Vatican, by a basilica in Brazil, by St. John's in New York, and by the Seville Cathedral in Spain. And you'll see in this next slide all kinds of carved statues and figurines. 3,400 of them. We did not photograph them all. We did have an opportunity, though, to do the rooftop tour, which is very interesting. You take an elevator up to the rooftop, and you can almost see, I think it was in this area that we were walking through, you get real up close and personal with the detail of this gorgeous, gorgeous building. It's soaring, it's awe-inspiring, it's staggering, outside and inside. Look at the interior. And notice, way down in the bottom, those things look like ants. Those are people. The interior is so massive, you feel completely overwhelmed and dwarfed by your presence there. But then let's move on to the big cathedral. And that would be St. Peter's at the Vatican. Actually, I'm told it's not a cathedral, it's a basilica. Those of you with a Catholic background may understand that better than I do. That's a building that took over 100 years to build. The architects were multiple in that building. Bramante, Michelangelo, Maderno, Bernini were the lead architects, and there were many others that were involved with it. And of course, the design for the dome goes back to the father of Renaissance architecture, Mr. Brunelleschi. St. Peter's is the most renowned work of Renaissance architecture, and hands down the largest church in the world. In fact, when you walk into the main nave, and I think we can almost see it there, see this area that's cordoned off? What they have marked on the floor between that cordoned area is, this is how big the other churches are. And if they were in this church, they'd end here, or they'd end here, or they'd end here. But look at how big and fabulous we are. I pause when I look at some of these structures. They're gorgeous, and I deeply appreciate the artwork. But how do they fit in with our understanding of the divine? And how do they help us in our spiritual journey? We'll be getting to that in a moment. One of the things that I find actually very disturbing about this building, one is it's so ornate that it is overwhelming. In fact, I update my mother with regular emails when we travel, and I told her, you know what? It is so ornate, so beautiful. Every square inch is somehow decorated exquisitely that it's almost vulgar. The other thing is I know a little bit about the background of this church. A lot of this building was constructed from stones that were removed from the old Roman Forum. It had been fallen into disrepair, it was hopeless, so they just hauled the rock across Rome and used it to help build this church. They were good at recycling back in those days. But they were beginning to realize that what they had in mind for this massive edifice was going to cost a lot of money. And part of the impetus for this particular basilica was what is called the Counter-Reformation. You know, Martin Luther was coming out with these ideas that weren't totally in sync with what the Catholic Church was teaching. And they were losing attendance. They were losing people to Protestantism. And they decided that the way to get people back to the church was to build a big, beautiful church. I'm not quite sure I fully understand that reasoning, but that's how they thought back in those days. And to fund this building, they became very active in promoting the sale of indulgences. You buy an indulgence, and that'll help pay your way to heaven. You won't have to hang out in purgatory as long. You can go to the next slide, Bertie. Oh, I forgot about that. Just a little more of St. Peter's, the Baldacchino by Bernini, and of course Michelangelo's Pieta. And that's just, well, you can see how ornate everything is. But the indulgences, the church was selling forgiveness for a fee. And they became very active and promoting this idea that you can buy your way into heaven. And we have to remember, back in the 14 and 1500s, people were largely illiterate. They could only go by what they were told. They were very superstitious. That's when the whole idea of purgatory really took hold, as well as indulgences. The more you give to the church, the less time you'll spend in purgatory, and the faster you'll get to heaven. Was it about their spiritual growth and evolution? Or was it about money? You be the judge. All of the churches we visited had crypts everywhere. These are a few from Santa Croce. The one on the top left is the family crypt for the Bonatti family, Michelangelo's family. The wealthiest and most prestigious people in the community are the ones that are buried in the most richly decorated chapels and niches and close to the main altar. You see, the belief was the closer your bones were to the main altar, the faster you'd get to heaven. Well, that was really neat for the people that had buku bucks and could afford to support the church and not only make generous contributions to the church, but build beautiful things that honored them. But where would that leave most of the people? Where would that leave most of the peasantry? We really didn't stand much of a chance of getting to heaven as they understood it anytime soon, did you? Here's a picture of the tomb of Pope Julius II. He commissioned Michelangelo to create his tomb. I don't know that you can really see it there. It is massive. Those figures are at least 1.5 times the size of a human being, and his sculpture of Moses is world-renowned. Interestingly, you might notice that Moses has a couple of little interesting growths or appendages, if you will. He had horns, and that was somewhat common in Renaissance depictions of Moses. And it goes back to when St. Jerome was working on a translation of the Bible. There's a word in there that can be translated either as horns or as rays, like rays of light. Well, St. Jerome made a mistake in his translation. He said when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments from God, he had horns. So if anyone ever tells you that what you read in the Bible is the gospel truth, take that with a grain of salt. But this is what you can have for a crypt if you're a pope, or a cardinal, or some other very big mucky-muck in the hierarchy, or somebody who's very wealthy and could endow the church generously. There is a story of a church that's in Florence, Santa Croce. It's actually one of my favorite ones, and I didn't include a picture here. But when we were looking at the facade of Santa Croce, on the outside, way up on top, in a very contrasting mosaic, is a Star of David. We happened to be with a guide that day, and I said, so what's with the Star of David up there on the top of a Christian church? And she said that one of the major benefactors for adding this marble facade to Santa Croce was a Jewish merchant. And he wanted to participate, very civic-minded, and of course wanted to be remembered for his big contribution. And his two criteria for many, many dollars, euros, what did they have back in those days? Lira? His criteria is it had to have a Star of David prominently displayed in the design. And his other criteria was that his crypt had to be within the Santa Croce precincts. Well, as a Jewish gentleman, neither his religion or the Christian religion would allow him to be buried within the church, especially close to the altar, so he could get to heaven faster. But the solution was, his crypt is directly beneath the threshold of the main door to Santa Croce. Interesting, the things they came up with and the reasons. Well, there are all kinds of magnificent, beautiful things to see in Italy. What makes this one so special? When I looked at that, when we first found it and approached it, it's elegant in its simplicity, is it not? It doesn't overwhelm. It doesn't blow you away. In fact, it's really rather inviting, more so than those big, massive cathedrals that are awe-inspiring. The interior of Santo Spiritus is likewise beautiful, but not overwhelming. And it is filled with light. There's so many of those big old churches are so dark, but this one is beautiful and light-filled. And I got it. I got it after looking at all these other gorgeous, magnificent, staggeringly stunning, beautiful buildings. I got it. Spiritual growth is not about a massive structure and exquisite ornamentation. It's not about being dazzlingly out there. It's about what's in here. And like churches and cathedrals, spiritual development takes time. Let's look at that for a moment. How do we express our spiritual development on the outside? Well, how we live and talk and act, how we treat those around us, that's our exterior. And razzle and dazzle and bling is not what spirituality is all about. What is it about? 1 Corinthians gives us a hint. It says, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and have all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have and deliver my body up to be burned, but have not love, I am nothing. It's not about the razzle-dazzle. It's not about the bling. It's about what comes from the inside to the outside. that are hallmarks of our spiritual journey. You know the rest. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It doesn't insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It doesn't rejoice in what's wrong, but rejoices in truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and love never ends. In our spiritual journey, we have to ask ourselves some important questions. Am I a clanging bell? Or am I love? Am I powerful? Or am I patient and kind? Am I envious or arrogant, boastful or rude? Do I insist on my own way? Do I always have to be right? Do I celebrate truth? Can I endure steadfastly? Is all I do and say rooted in love? These are the qualities of a spiritually rich life that show on the outside, but are products of our inner spiritual work. Our inner work, like Santo Spiritus, is the work we're called to do. What is our spiritual work? Well, I've got some bullet points here. Explore spiritual ideas. Get acquainted with them. Test them in your own life. Do they work? Don't they work? And live from them. Nurture your spiritual side by feeding it daily. We kind of talked about that last week. We don't want to feed the pigeons. What we don't want, we want to feed what in our life we want more of. And we want more spiritually insightful thoughts and ideas, and we want to engage in uplifting conversation and activities and friendships. And of course, always, always, always our time in daily prayer and meditation. Take a break. Take respite from the world and all the world's demands, and foster your relationship with the divine intelligence from which you came. And repeat, and repeat, and repeat, until you too are light-filled. The other thing that was so poignant to me in our travels is considering all the time it took to build these massive edifices. 140 years, 600 years, even Santo Spiritus took somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 years. Our inner spiritual work, like building a cathedral, takes time as well as commitment and tenacity. In fact, our spiritual work is our lifelong project. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Just do a little bit every day. Eventually, you will look back and be amazed at how far you've come. I remember when I first was introduced to Unity, and just so excited about spiritual principles and ideas. And back in those days, I lived in Seattle and was attending Unity of Seattle. And I'd go to classes, and I was just amazed at the tremendous wisdom and insight of my teachers. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to learn all this? There's so much, and it's so different from what I'm used to, and to take it in and live from it. I couldn't imagine. But here I am, somewhere around 37 years later. And those concepts that were so new and so amazing to me back then are now an integral part of who I am, very often without a second thought. Building our inner cathedral does take time. But a little bit of time every day is cumulative, and we will benefit and grow spiritually. You ever think of yourself as a cathedral? You're a Duomo, a glorious creation of humanity and spirituality. For the Creator lives in us, as us, and through us. we are a work in progress. And the goal is not to create some dazzling edifice or to feed our egos with amazing feats, but to develop our inner spiritual self, that it is beautiful and rich in its simplicity, and it gently and lovingly translates into the outer world in all we do and say. We don't need a Brunelleschi, or a Michelangelo, or a Bernini. We are the architects of our own spiritual journey. And now, knowing this truth, let's join together again in our affirmation for the day. Through my daily connection with Spirit, inspired by the wisdom of sage spiritual teachers, I am the architect of my own spiritual journey. Happy building. And so it is.